Over 65,000 developers took this survey, which means it's probably something to take a look at. Even if you might not agree with everything that is shown throughout this survey, that's a lot of people telling their thoughts and opinions on how they create, how they build, how they use tools. So I haven't looked at this yet. I did take the survey, but here's just a good chance for me to take a look through all of this, maybe learn something, and maybe get a little ranty at some points too. If you do taking surveys and you are a Laravel developer, or maybe you're not, there's a State of Laravel survey that Tobias Petri put out. That's stateoflaravel.com. I'll put it in the description below, but please take that survey just to share some thoughts about who you are, what your affiliation with Laravel is, and then the Laravel ecosystem as a whole. All right, 65,437 coders from 185 countries around the world. Again, I think this just shows that if nothing else, if we don't learn anything else from this and you're watching this video and you just wanted to learn my thoughts on what I think about X, Y, or Z, that's great. But I also want to take it as an opportunity to learn, like, okay, how are people thinking about this? How is my job as a creator, as an educator for people like this, how does that change? Because the way people think, the way people create, the way people code changes, it evolves over time, and knowing that is incredibly helpful for me. Hopefully it's helpful for you too. So salary information, mostly, again, this is just people who took the survey. It looks like most people in USA, but pretty widespread throughout the rest. Germany, second. India's third. Okay. And 76.3% have a Stack Overflow account. I actually don't think I have a Stack Overflow account. I think I answered no there. Educational attainment, I do not have. I do have a bachelor's, but it is not in computer science or anything. It's in communications. Learning to code, online resources. Okay, so I might have picked like a decent path as a creator then. If 82% of responses, they learn to code using online resources, I think that's a good sign for me. 18 to 24-year-olds are most likely to learn code at traditional schools of all the age groups. Interesting. Okay. Consistently for the last 3 years. So I never went to coding school. So I would imagine that if I was like recommending someone who was in this age category, I would probably tell them, I don't know if I would tell them to go to college if it was specifically for coding. I would probably have them take community college classes and then either find like an internship or like some sort of reputable coding bootcamp if you did want to go that route. Okay, technical documentation, API and SDK documents, okay, databases, Postgres, MySQL, okay, other tools, Docker, okay, 59% of developers, wow. NPM is 45%, so like NPM is just under Docker. Programming, scripting, markup languages. Okay, so this is just like the overview. Let's see. Overview, developer profile. Okay, yeah, that was just like the overview. So let's actually dive in. So we have education, learning to code, experience, education, bachelor's degree. Okay. Learning to code, online resources is huge. Coding bootcamp is 10.7 and family. Those are the lowest. Interesting. Colleague, 23.6%. Very interesting. Yeah, I would, if I had to guess, I would say that online resources is just going to continue to grow. And I don't know, I would say like the e-courses and maybe like colleague aspect of it, the community driven aspect is probably going to be big in the next thing. Like one of the things that I'm seeing a lot more of within this realm of folks is less about a coding bootcamp, more about, hey, here's this cohort of people who are learning together. Because even if you don't have a leader, maybe you're taking this course online together and you get to interact, you get to communicate, you get to build things together. I don't know where that would fall within this. Maybe like friend or family member. I would imagine that to grow over the next couple of years as well. Online resources. So documentation is top. Stack Overflow. I wonder if they skew that a little bit. Like, I don't know. I don't look at Stack Overflow that much anymore. AI is middle of the road. I'm surprised at that, but I guess this is like learning to code. So maybe like people who are learning don't necessarily reach for that first. Written tutorials, how-to videos, video-based e-courses, Then down here is auditory material. Interesting. Games that teach programming. Okay. Technical documentation, experience, years coding professionally. Okay, so around, I would say, I think I say I was in the 5 to 9 years is where I am. It's always interesting because professionally, I have never technically coded professionally. I've been the coding adjacent support engineer, solutions sales engineer. I've never been a developer professionally in the sense that I am being paid to write code for a company. So I did put 5 to 9 years just because, but years of professional coding experience. So a lot of seniors who took this, product managers. Okay, so interesting. So product managers, top of the pack. Let's see, games, back-end dev experience. Yeah, this is a wide range. Developer roles, full stack, back-end, student. Okay, those are the tops. Key territories, again, USA and Germany are the top right here. Okay, age 25 to 34 years old. Looks like I'm middle of the pack as well. Let's jump into technology. This is what most people are looking for. So most popular technologies: JavaScript, HTML, CSS, PHP, middle of the road, Python. I was like, Python. Okay, that makes sense. And professional developers, SQL. Interesting. I wonder how many people are going to get upset about this. HTML, CSS as the programming language. Learning to code, Python. Wow. That's very interesting to me. The people who are learning to code are mostly Python. I would imagine this is mostly because of like the machine learning push. I know a lot of like boot camps are pushing Python more than even JavaScript in a lot of ways, but this big of, I know it's not that big, but 66% versus 60.4% in a group of 52,000 developers is quite large. And then other coders, Python. It's like professional, Python is fourth. All respondents, Python is third. It is very interesting to me that Python is that close to JavaScript. Like it beats TypeScript in a lot of ways. It beats, I'm trying to think, like it beats all, of course, like it beats everything else. But in the sense of like professional developers, how I would assume that, especially Stack Overflow adjacent developers, yes, JavaScript is going to be top. But I would have thought that Java, the C languages, and maybe something like Kotlin or something like that, I would have assumed that would have been closer to Python than it is right here. With Python being like, with JavaScript being top, SQL, and then like Python being fourth, it was really surprising to me that Python is that far ahead of the pack than Java, C#, C++, PHP. Maybe unsurprising in some ways, surprising in others. Okay, let's see how many of these I don't know. I don't know Zephyr. I've heard of Nim, and by I don't know, I've never heard of. MicroPython, I have heard of. Delphi, GDScript. Okay, I at least know of most of these. Apex, I would assume that's just Salesforce code, right? Salesforce Apex. Prolog, I do not know. So Prolog, Crystal is Ruby's. Like TypeScript, I think it's like Ruby. It's like TypeScript for JavaScript, but for Ruby, I think. I've seen Crystal Lang, like the website. So I don't know Zephyr. I've heard of Nim. Yeah, I'm surprised how low Elixir is. I know that one's kind of like moving up, but I would assume that would have been closer to like Kotlin, like in this pack over here, Rust, Kotlin, Dart. I would assumed Elixir would have been up there. And maybe, is Erlang here? Okay, so Erlang is here. So that's tricky because if you push them together, it bumps it up a little bit. Not that much. It would have bumped it up to, yeah, like what, 0.9%. So just under 1% plus Elixir, so 3.3. Yeah, it would have only bumped it up there. Yeah, so like Scala being above Elixir is a little surprising to me. And that's in all developers. Oh, that's professional developers. All developers, Elixir is still lower. Interesting. Databases. Postgres. So for those who follow along with Aaron Francis and Mostly Technical, he's putting together courses for pretty much every database. And he's going to hit the top 3, it looks like. But he started with SQLite. And I think the next one is Postgres for them, which makes sense because Postgres looks like it's the biggest by a long run. Wow. that surprising to me. I've never worked professionally as a developer in the sense that I've worked for a company that I write code for them to improve their product. I have been or written code for companies in various forms, but not necessarily as a strict developer. And the companies I've worked with have all used MySQL. And most of my products are I have one product in Postgres, one product in MySQL RDS, and then one product in SQLite. I wish there was a chart of how this has changed over the years. Maybe there is going to be, but I'm curious to see how things like Dynamo, Mongo, like all the non-relational ones, I think for a point in time, I wouldn't have been surprised if they were higher, at least in all respondents, maybe not professional developers, but I wouldn't have been surprised if they were higher at one point in time than Postgres or MySQL. I will probably regret saying that, but just because I know that there was like a good 2 to 5 years where that was valuable. I actually did read the DynamoDB book by Alex. I am forgetting the last name, but incredible book, and so much that goes on within those like high performance, high capacity databases and how to use them. So many databases. So Aaron Francis, if you're watching this, I don't think you are, but if you are, you have a lot of work to do. I can't wait to see the Raven DB Aaron Francis course. Okay, cloud platforms, AWS by a mile, professional developers, even bigger of a jump. I have never hosted anything on Azure. Of course, I've hosted on pretty much everything like top here. I use Hetzer now, but I've hosted everything on all of this except for Azure. Learning to code, there we go. Yeah, Azure jumps way down there. Google Cloud, interesting for learning to code. It doesn't surprise me that Vercel is getting up there for learning to code, but I guess maybe because of Firebase for learning to code, like within this, okay, Firebase is still down here, Superbase creeping up, but it surprises me, other coders. Yeah, it surprises me that Google Cloud is first for learning to code. Professional developers, like this doesn't surprise me as much. I don't know Microsoft Azure, but for Google Cloud to be top for learning to code is really interesting. Google Cloud went from 24, so Google Cloud grew and Azure climbed as well. I'm wondering if it's because companies are moving off of AWS, and so the ones who are just naturally fall into Azure and Google Cloud, maybe. I'm curious of how far Cloudflare grew in the last year. I know that they've picked up a lot of steam. Web frameworks and technologies. Here we go. Let's see. Okay. Node.js, React, jQuery, still top 3. There we go. I'm curious if Alpine.js is on here, but Alpine.js is basically jQuery with more modern API. So if you're still using jQuery or your work is, maybe consider switching over. Professional developers, React, Node.js, jQuery, learning to code. jQuery didn't drop down as far as I thought it would have been. Flask, wow, interesting. Maybe I'm gonna switch channels. I'm gonna start teaching people how to use Flask. Laravel with the Flask API. That would be a terrible video, but I'm surprised how Fast API doesn't surprise me. I think that's a great API in Python. And maybe that's like where all the Python people are going then, is Flask. Because remember, learning to code, top was Python for learning to code. Other coders, WordPress, okay. WordPress is low for professional developers. Same thing with all respondents, kind of low. WordPress and Laravel discrepancy is very interesting to me for all respondents. Professional developers, same like discrepancy. Learning to code, WordPress, that's a more discrepancy. And that's, I guess you could say that's my job now, is I'm hoping to, with the help of my incredible team at Laravel, I'm hoping to bump this up. For people learning to code, I think that Laravel could be up here with Vue and Svelte and WordPress. It's cool to see us still in this pack, especially for learning to code. It's a little sad to be below like Spring Boot, Angular, and ASP. But at the same time, I think Laravel is a great choice for people learning to code. if not just as much of a good choice as Django or Flask, for example. Then other coders, 5.7%, Laravel. Okay, so in learning to code, let's see like where the other full stack ones. So we have Django, we have Spring Boot, I guess you could say would be full stack. Blazor, Ruby on Rails. Okay, so yeah, a lot of full stack are still low, like in terms of there's no Phoenix framework, surprisingly. I don't see it. So that's sad. But yeah, no like full stack, probably the closest one. And I'm surprised how high that is compared to Laravel, but maybe just because of that Python learning to code aspect. Very interesting. Embedded technologies, Raspberry Pi. So basically people who are using AI, and I would assume Python then, to do any kind of like machine learning, AI embedding, that kind of thing. Other frameworks, libraries, .NET. Okay, so yeah, these are like Spring Framework, Flutter. Any other ones I notice? Xamarin and Tori. Okay, I'm glad that Tori's getting some note. That's a Rust one that kind of is looking to take over what Electron is doing. Other tools, Docker. Okay, Homebrew, Make, Vite. It's incredible how much both attraction and like adoption that Vite has had in being, I don't know the background of all of these tools, but in being what I would assume in the top 10 at least. Top 10 is probably the newest tool. And to have that much adoption is crazy. Composer, professional developers, Docker, NPM. It's weird to put Docker and NPM on the same thing, like for tools, but I guess I get it. Visual Studio Code. Wow. Learning to code, Visual Studio Code. That's helpful for me. I am trying to think of what's the easiest way to get people learning to code. And I am going to have another video coming out on Google IDX, which is basically like a code developer in the browser, and you can run Laravel, you can run PHP, and you can run everything you need to run without having to actually download anything. You don't have to download a code editor. You don't have to download Laravel Herd or anything like that. But it is surprising to me that's like the first thing that people recommend. I also think it's probably the hard, like getting your development set up to be set up is probably the longest and hardest part about learning to code, because you don't, a lot of things like, yeah, you have CodePen and stuff like that. I wonder if that's in here, like a CodePen, or yeah, that might be in a different maybe section. But the amount of stuff you have to get ready to learn to code takes a lot to wrap your head around. And if you don't figure that out, you could just be turned off to learning to code altogether before you even start. Asynchronous tools, so Jira and Confluence, head of the pack, professional developers, Jira and Confluence. Markdown files, number 3. Very interesting, especially with professional developers. Linear is probably like up on the track as well. Basecamp is still in the running. Okay. Learning to code, Markdown files, and GitHub discussions. Very interesting. Okay. Notion. All this is helpful for me as someone who's teaching people both new who are learning to code, but then also like how to get better at code. Like it helps me to know what other people are doing or thinking about. So responses. It's interesting how the responses have shifted. And probably this is just because as you go along in the survey, but 4,000 responses for this one. Oh, 56,000. Here we go. Synchronous tools. Microsoft Teams, Slack, Zoom, Discord. Makes sense. Learning to code, Discord. Wow. That's a huge jump. This is one of those things where I am still convinced that Discord, that real-time applications like Discord, WhatsApp, Zoom and Teams, probably like all of these don't really meet in that. Telegram maybe less so than the rest, but I think that real-time communication is only helpful in certain situations when learning to code, aka Discord. I think as people start to slowly move back to as much asynchronous communication as possible, then we're going to have more forums. We're going to have more like long thought out discussions of, hey, here's like this text-based course. And then you can ask questions to the creator over that time. So I'm interested to see how that kind of grows. And it doesn't look like there's any kind of like forum set up. I don't know all of these, but Windows, still very popular. I am surprised that Mac OS and Ubuntu, maybe because the developers who take this within Stack Overflow are probably more Ubuntu flavored than Mac OS flavored, maybe. But like, I would assume then if you took Debian and other Linux, like all the Linux based would probably beat Mac OS then. Very interesting in my mind. I would assume that Mac OS and Windows would be more closely top of the pack, and then everything else would be in the 30% range, for example. Everything total of 30%, I should say. iPad OS. That's crazy. I've never coded on iPad. I know a couple of people who do. Chrome OS. I used to code on Chrome OS because that was the only like laptop I could afford. And so I learned how to code JavaScript on Chrome OS. AI search and developer tools, ChatGPT, top of the pack, Copilot, Find. I love Find. I think that's very helpful. Very interesting. Claude. Okay. Perplexity. I did not know. It's cool to see Cody on here. I know a couple of developer relations people from Cody. U.com. I don't know that one. It's cool to see. It's interesting to see Wolfram Alpha. I didn't know that Wolfram Alpha, maybe because of Python, I would imagine, like maybe some kind of like math stuff. That's what I think of when I think of Wolfram Alpha. But yeah, professional developers learning to code, ChatGPT, top of the pack. Very interesting for that. Admired and desired. This is one that I saw a glimpse of, that PHP and Laravel were very low. I'm surprised, especially within the admired piece. But I also don't know how they calculate all this. So right off the bat, it looks like Rust, probably the most admired and highest, like very high in relation to desired. Python, most desired, still very highly admired. Because then you have PHP here, 43.8% admired, which doesn't surprise me. Like this, like the actual PHP part doesn't surprise me as much. Let's see some other outliers. So Rust, definitely very highly admired. Wow. Zig. Okay. Yeah. Rust and Zig. Elixir. That doesn't surprise me as well either. TypeScript, just slightly higher admired than JavaScript. C#, way above plus. Kotlin. I knew Kotlin was very admired. I didn't know it was like that much above Java, for example. Okay. Databases. Postgres. Highly admired. That discrepancy between admired and desired surprises me probably the most. And then you have DuckDB, highly admired. I have not heard of DuckDB. DuckDB, in-process SQL. Okay, that makes sense. So very similar to ClickHouse, or what's the other one, like a Rabbit? Is that what it's called? I would assume that's what it is. I could be wrong. ClickHouse, is it Rabbit that I'm thinking of? Which one am I thinking of? Let's see. I don't see the one I'm thinking of here. So maybe it's ClickHouse that I'm thinking of. So DuckDB, very highly admired. You have SQLite, that's pretty standard. Redis, highly admired. Datomic, very highly admired. Cloud platforms, wow. I'm surprised AWS has so much admiration, in the sense of I thought it would be more middle of the road, especially with how desired it is. Cloudflare, even with all the controversy of like how they fired and everything, or I should say how that came to be, they didn't have too much of like admiration, at least from a company standpoint, with all the, the tactics that it seems to be going around. We're like, oh, let's get on a call, and you're automatically bumped up to higher standpoint. So I'm surprised with all that coming out, it's still very highly admired. Hetzner, that's awesome to see. I love that. Think top of the pack then. Yep. I love Hetzner. It's cheap. It works. I've never had any issues. Web frameworks and technology. React, Svelte, makes sense. ASP.NET Core. I've never written a single line of code in ASP.NET Core, but maybe I should. Next video, Laravel dev learns ASP.NET Core. Laravel, highly admired. 56.4%. So about the same as, let's see, 56, about the same as like Angular and Express, same as Ruby on Rails. Okay, so I can take that. Admired as much as a full stack framework like Ruby on Rails or Nuxt. Nuxt being so low really does surprise me. I know that the community loves it. And maybe they just don't have that many community members. Maybe like Laravel doesn't have many community members taking a survey like this. It looks like Phoenix is very highly admired. That's awesome to see. I love that. Embedded technologies, Cargo, that's Rust's. I'd assume, right? Yeah, Rust. That's their like NPM alternative, I think. Yeah, let's see. Cargo, embedded technology. Yeah, Cargo crates. It's weird that it's embedded technology. It's probably because I don't understand Rust as much as I probably should. Other frameworks, libraries, .NET. We have Rough. Gotta take a look. Rough framework. JavaScript, IO run, and Internet of Things development. Okay. Looks like jQuery. There you go. Very interesting. Other tools. You have Docker, Homebrew, integrated development environment. Again, Visual Studio Code. Very highly admired, very highly desired. NeoVim, highly admired. You folks know who you are. Asynchronous tools, Markdown file, very highly admired. Okay, AI search. Chat. This discrepancy is surprising to me as well, but I guess within developers, I'm surprised that there's not as much discrepancy here in the sense of, in my circles, Claude is very highly desired as well, of saying, hey, that's just as good, if not better, than ChatGPT. Worked with versus want to work with. Okay, this is a little confusing, but so JavaScript want to work with SQL, PHP want to work with TypeScript. What's the biggest one? JavaScript, HTML, PHP want to work with PHP. Okay, JavaScript, biggest one. JavaScript who want to work with JavaScript, HTML, CSS, Python. Okay, SQL, TypeScript, Go is very less. So Python probably the biggest. JavaScript, Python probably the biggest one. Yeah, databases. If you use that and you're like, what else are you thinking of using or want to work with? If you use that but want to work with that, cloud platforms, like who is Hetzner looking to move off of? Google Cloud. That's Heroku. Sorry. Hetzner. There's Fly.io on there. There we go. Hetzner. Want to work with Hetzner. Cloudflare. Okay, so Cloudflare is probably the biggest. Google Cloud, Azure, or AWS, I should say. Frameworks and technology. Let's see. Laravel. Okay, so not enough developers. It's probably just not enough developers took the Laravel survey who are Laravel developers. That's probably the biggest thing. Because then you have Node.js. They want to work with the biggest is React, and then Vue, and then Svelte. Okay, jQuery developers are Node developers by default. React developers second. React developers are Node developers and Next.js developers. Other frameworks. Okay. That might be everything that I was interested in. Okay, top paying technologies. This is an interesting one. If I had to, I'm going to not look at it again. If I had to guess, top paying technologies are going to be like I would consider more of the enterprisey ones. Java, Scala. I applied for a Scala job. I never wrote in it. I applied for a Scala job when I was unemployed. And it was a very high paying technology. Scala, maybe Rust and Zig and stuff like that. Let's see. Erlang and Elixir. There you go. Scala. Okay, I got one right. There we go. Rust, 76,000. Okay. Apex, Salesforce. So if you know any sales, I would assume this is Apex language. Let's see. Apex language. Yeah, Salesforce. So if Salesforce, you will probably get paid pretty well. Clojure. Say Erlang, Elixir, Clojure. Makes sense. Lua. Wow. I should start programming in Lua. More so just because I like the fact of what Lua is. Change in salaries. Okay, so biggest bump in NIM. What does NIM language look like? NIM programming language. It compiles to C. Okay, yeah, so this is like the Python Ada modula. So this is like the Rust alternative that compiles to C. Elixir. So down for Elixir, very interesting. Up for Erlang, VBA, down for Groovy. Very interesting median salaries going down. I don't know what that says about the economy or what that says about jobs in general. Yeah, all the developers reported a decrease in median salary. Interesting. Only 3 developers saw an increase. It's sad, but maybe it's just because a lot of VC money kind of drying up, a lot of less developers in a lot of ways, maybe having to take pay cuts to move to different jobs. But why don't we call it there? So it looks like there's more on like AI, sentiment usage, developer tools, work. There's a little bit more information on salary, company size, work environment, employed full-time, contractor, freelance, coding outside of work. This would be probably helpful. Hobby. Wow, 70%. So most developers code outside of work. Okay. Professional development, self-paced, bootstrapping, and business. It doesn't surprise me that this is so low in the sense of 15% are bootstrapping in business, because it does surprise me that's the number for hobby and this is the number for bootstrapping in business. I would expect there to be a much wider, closer range where like people who would say, I'm burnt out of coding, so I don't code outside of work. Usually there's more of those than there are who have the gumption, I guess, to say, okay, I want to bootstrap a business. And so this many coding outside of work as a hobby. And again, the people who say this, maybe it's, okay, I code 1 hour a week or something like that outside of work. Community, so Stack Overflow site usage, other blogs, learning to code, frequency, participation and feedback. Okay, professional developers, developer experience, time spent answering questions, time spent searching for questions, frequency of productivity frictions, needing help from people outside of your immediate team. Okay, very interesting. So usually it's like for individual contributors, it's I need help from someone outside of my team. Again, this is all interesting to me because I necessarily haven't worked as a professional developer in the sense that I'm just writing code 24/7 or 40 hours a week. Ability to find knowledge information. I often find myself answering questions I've already answered before. Knowledge silos. I wonder if there's any information on like where, how long, like what this process is for people who want to find information, because obviously a lot of the content I write or create and make videos on is people who have questions, and as individual contributors, they're like, hey, I'm going to go and learn about that, whether it's a question that comes up or they just want to have additional information that they might know. Doesn't look like that's in here. Resources, so traditional public search engine. Okay. And I would assume information like this would fall in this. For individual contributor, amount of technical debt, biggest frustration, complexity of tech stack, tracking my work. Very interesting. This would make sense to me, showing my contributions. That's always very tough as an individual contributor within development or otherwise. It's tough to say, hey, here's what I did. You have to get good at that as a employee. Here's what I did. Here's why it matters. You have to get good at selling yourself to higher ups. Maintaining security. Okay. Job industry, satisfaction, industry, complacent at work, 20.2% happy, 32.1% not happy out of 29,000 responses. Contributed the most to job satisfaction. So satisfaction points up, learning new tech. Okay. Oh, happy points. Yeah, happy points. Improving quality of code in developer environments. The lowest happy is like contributing to open source, excellent internal observability practices. And then complacent points, I would assume or unhappy points. Okay, very interesting. Overall, this was a very interesting survey. I think there's so many people who, whether you're learning to code or professional developer, whatever technologies you're working in, that very often have a hard time escaping their bubble. And okay, what am I learning? Or whether you don't code outside of work, or you just don't feel like learning something new, or it's not a requirement for your job. It seems like there's a lot of room for this kind of learning, this kind of improving, this kind of growing that doesn't necessarily happen within the job itself. And a lot of times I've been a part of this. Parts of the time when I'm learning to code and learning to new technologies is because I'm having to do that for work, or I'm having to do that to research this thing that I need to do for work. And the people who are usually more successful as developers, and at least in this case, more happy, are the ones who their work has given them the opportunity to learn these new technologies, to take surveys like this, to expand their reach. So overall, I learned something. I learned how I might be able to connect with people like yourself who are maybe watching this video and you're like, hey, first of all, you should probably subscribe so I can know who you are, and maybe leave a comment so I can know who you are and why this video was helpful. But two, now I know how to better reach people like you who are maybe in a job where you're trying to learn something new, or you're stuck with something, or you're hoping and envisioning for a better future with a different technology than you're working on right now. Or maybe you're just trying to create a new business and you're trying to code with that. So whoever you are, this survey helped me get to know a little bit about what you might be thinking about, what new developers might be thinking about. And I don't know, it's giving me some ideas for how better to create videos in the future. So keep creating. I'll see you next time.